All right, folks, let's reassemble. And so we're continuing our reflection on people's experience of priests in schools. We have to change the roster for this time around. And Msgr. Schaedel has asked to go first because he has an 11:30 Mass. So we don't want to be deprived of his wisdom. And as I mentioned last night, he has unique experience because he was the first lay principal in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, and then ended up becoming a priest and eventually vicar general, and now pastor of a very large, wonderful parish with a great school. So, Monsignor, share your wisdom with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Father Peter. And like most Father Peters, I have to work, so I do have Mass at 11:30. So I want to say hi to Friar John. Friar John, are you still in Indiana?
Yeah, I'm not in Indiana. I'm actually in Ohio now. I'm in Carroll, Ohio, at the Basilica and Shrine of Our Lady of Consolation.
Okay, great. It's good to see you. Good to see you. We have the provincial headquarters of the conventuals here in southern Indiana within the Archdiocese, and they staff several of our parishes. So I recognized Friar John there.
You have any stories to tell about him?
Yes, but I think we better get offline or at least turn off the recording. Thanks for that. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Father Peter gave me a little introduction. And I kind of have a very similar background to Father Peter as far as Catholic schools go. I'm a couple years older than Father Peter, but we kind of grew up in the same era. I went to Catholic schools all the way through Catholic college. When I started to school, it was the practice here in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, Indiana, that if you did not send your children to the Catholic school, you had to get permission from the pastor. And if you did not get permission from the pastor, you were denied the sacraments. You weren't excommunicated, you just couldn't receive the sacraments. Now, I never did see that in practice, but that was the situation. What goes around comes around. It was always our practice, and I've talked to Father Peter about this too. In my growing up, we went to Mass every single day, 5 days a week. And we had 3 priests in the parish, and we had the custom of hearing confessions during Mass. So during Mass, one priest was obviously the celebrant, and the other 2 priests were hearing confessions, and we just rotated the rows through. Whether you needed to go to confession or not, you went. And then when it was time to distribute Holy Communion, the other 2 priests jumped out of the confessional and distributed communion, and we did the same thing 5 days a week. I tell people here at St. Luke, and I believe this, that next to the administration of the sacraments, the most important ministry we have is the Catholic school. The Catholic school is our most important thing. We have, obviously, as somebody said earlier, the priest presence in the school is so essential for many reasons, but especially the administration of the sacraments. Our kids go to Mass at least 2 days a week, unless there's a holy day or a special observance or something, and then we go to Mass 3 days a week. We have confessions every week for the children. The younger grades have a scheduled penance service in Advent and Lent, but then once a week we hear confessions, and it's over recess time, and anybody can come when they want. My predecessor had started that practice, and when I got here, I thought, oh yeah, that'll be good. There's 2 of us hearing every week, and we can hardly get all the confessions in. The kids that come on their own, and they give up their recess time to do that. In terms of Catholic identity, for example, if we have a funeral, or if we have 2 Masses every day, and some of those Masses would be like this 11:30 Mass during the school day, the altar servers come and serve Mass. And I got a little pushback from some of the teachers initially. Well, we don't want them to miss class. And I said, serving a funeral or serving Mass is part of the Catholic school experience. And that's what we're going to do. And it just works out fine. They don't miss that much class. And we rotate it so it's not the same children all the time. I made the mistake, especially during October, of telling the students, if I ask you if you have a rosary in your pocket, I'll give you $5. Well, of course, they'll come up to me, I've got a rosary. I said, no, I have to ask you if you have the rosary. One day I went to the cafeteria and stopped at a 6th grade table. Who has a rosary in his or her pocket? All 6 of them did. Cost me a friggin' $30, but I think it was worth it to do that. So little things like that. I think just the priestly presence in the school, as many others have said, is so important. Another point that was made earlier, I think Kevin made the point, and he was very charitable about it. A pastor can make or break a school. Let's face it, a pastor can make or break a parish. When I was Vicar General, we, like some other dioceses, have had some of our great schools close. Not many, but some of them have. And I can tell you this much, had there been a different pastor in that parish, that school would still be alive today. But a pastor can make or break a parish. Father Peter mentioned that I was the first lay principal in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. That was in 72. The first 2 or 3 years when I went to principals' meetings, it was me and all the sisters. And it was very handy because salespersons would come to the principal's office and I'd be sitting there and they'd say, is sister here? And I'd say, no. When will she be back? I have no idea. Because they expected to see a sister sitting in the principal's office. And I'll never forget, we had a pastor at that parish who really hired me as the first lay principal, but he really wasn't all behind the school. And sometimes we get into discussions and he would say, well, you know, I didn't go to a Catholic school. And I'd say, yes, Father, I can tell that you didn't go to a Catholic school. But I lasted there 6 years and then I decided to go to the seminary. Father Peter referenced last night the fracas that we've had here in the Archdiocese with several of our schools. Some of the teachers married outside of the church and involved in a so-called same-sex marriage. But I'm very proud of our Archbishop, who has really been steadfast. Now, even with the Supreme Court ruling the other day about teachers in religious schools, now the attorneys are trying to argue, well, you know, these two people at this one Roncalli High School, which is my alma mater, these two staff members that were dismissed, well, they weren't teachers, they're guidance counselors, so they don't count. Well,
even more so.
Yeah, exactly. A guidance counselor counts so much more. So it's been a big ruckus, and it's not going to end. One more thing I do want to mention, we are so happy to have the Dominican sisters on the panel here, that their apostolate is teaching. That's so important. But I also want to mention, I think it's same for the religious brothers. We don't have the Franciscan Brothers of Brooklyn here. They probably don't know where Indiana is. But we did have a strong presence of the Holy Cross Brothers here in Indianapolis. And one of the schools that was in this ruckus about the same-sex marriage is Cathedral High School. It's a so-called private Catholic high school, but they willingly went along with the Archbishop's directive about what they should do about policies for their teachers. And I'm very excited because I understand their roots is Holy Cross. The school began and was staffed for years by Holy Cross Brothers out of South Bend, Notre Dame. And of course, it's an all-lay staff now with a lay board. But they're reestablishing that Holy Cross connection. And this fall, they're going to have a Holy Cross priest and 2 Holy Cross brothers on the staff. And I think that's great. The teaching brothers have such a wonderful influence, especially on young men in our high schools or grade schools. So we're excited about the religious brothers coming back to teach here in Indianapolis. So that's all I really wanted to say, and I thank you, Father Peter, for allowing me to go out of step here, because I'll be having Mass at 11:30, and I will pray for Father Peter and all other sinners. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsignor talks about having the altar boys serve funerals during the school day, and I had the parish I grew up in was a very, very large parish and had funerals every day, sometimes 2 and 3 a day, and there was a rotation to it. But in 8th grade, we had actually teams, and I was the president of the altar boys, and I made myself the captain of every team. So I was out of school for every funeral, and I usually missed math, which I didn't like to begin with. So it all worked out very, very well. So let's see, who's next up? Sister Elizabeth Ann.
Hi, Father. Thanks. One thing about schedules changing and the roster shifting, I got to hear more than I would have. And so it allows me to kind of shift my remarks somewhat, because I'd really rather kind of talk from the heart. Part of the Dominican tradition, which I'm never expected to be part of growing up Presbyterian, but God has a sense of humor. It's a great reverence for priests. I think it has something to do with our founder being a priest, with Dominic being a priest. And so the priests always have a special part in our prayers. We pray for vocations to the priesthood every night at Compline. And the priests associated with our schools become really part of our family. And as I've listened to everybody's comments, I think 2 things become primary. One is you're a father. You are a father. God is our Father because He has a son. The best theology teacher I ever had, and I hesitate to say this on a recording, was a Jesuit.
Oh, geez.
But his cause is up for beatification, so I think I'm safe. But Father John Hardin was a man of the gospel. And he said, we've got one God, we get that. 2 missions, some people miss that, but it's easy to understand. 3 persons, okay. So, but there are 4 relationships in the God. God could not be a father without a son. And Jesus could not be a son without a father. When you are called father in a relative sense, it sets you apart. It automatically puts you in a relationship with the person who calls you father. And that relationship defines your role in the church. And that's why you're irreplaceable. 55 years ago, there were 120,000 sisters in the United States. 112,000 of them were involved in education, K through 12 education. Last year, there were 2,500 of the 47,000 involved in K through 12 education. There were fewer than 1% priests and religious brothers. So we have in 50 years gone from 92% religious faculty to 97 point something percent lay faculty. So your role becomes even more irreplaceable. And even the smallest things matter. I think that relationship, if we've learned one thing from this period of quarantine, it's that virtual presence doesn't get it. Virtual community doesn't get it. It's not what we hunger for as a human being. You know, we come into this world, human beings, body and soul, with three capacities. You can check the catechism in the glossary. I love how it defines human person. But we have the capacity for knowledge, self-possession, and freedom. And because we have those three human capacities, we can engage in communion. Communion that has both, as the documents tell us, a vertical and a horizontal dimension. Communion with God and communion with our brothers and sisters. And that communion is what the essence of Catholic education is about. It's an academic community, and we have to do everything that we can to do that well. But it is a spiritual community. And the documents with that in baptism, Gravissimum, number 8, you know, that school is supposed to be a place that there's an atmosphere of charity, an atmosphere of virtue, and a spirit of freedom and charity. That's in our constitutions, that quote from Gravissimum. So we make our vows on those constitutions, and that sentence is in there. But the reason we can have that atmosphere is so that we grow and help kids grow in virtue, in grace. Grace is your instrumentality in one way because of the sacraments. Grace builds on nature, and the one need a human person has, in that same definition in the catechism, is to be part of a society, to be part of a group. So the Catholic school, the thing that makes it different is its community, which gives witness to the church. So we all have to be there. There's a quote, it's in my handout, if you want to sometime check on that, see what it's saying. But there's a line that talks about, it's from lay Catholics in school, oddly enough. It calls the church, it says we're all called to witness to this great community, which is the church. It's not a virtual community. It is an actual, real community of which we are part by our baptism. This is where nature and grace meet, almost collide and explode. And I think that one very basic reality that we have to remember is the more fully the church is represented, the more it's authentically present. We need everybody. We need priests. We need brothers and sisters. We need lay persons, all realizing that to give full witness to the church, we're all part of it. Not the same part, but we're all part of it. And because we complement one another, it's a very enriching relationship. This would be so much more productive. This conference is great, and I'm grateful to be part of it. But if we were together, would it not be wonderful? Because the interchanges that happen, we move beyond networking to forming communion. Anybody can network. I almost hate the word. Jesus was not a networker. But when we are able to have that, he left his real presence. It's not a virtual presence. It's not a symbolic presence. It is a real presence. And that real presence cannot exist without the priesthood. I think that the greatest thing you can do for the church is to love your vocation as a priest. To be happy as a priest. You're a priest and a king and a prophet, that you were ordained for that. And a priest offers sacrifice. You certainly offer the sacrifice of the Mass, but you also offer the sacrifice of your own self. You spend yourself for the church. You teach, you exercise the prophetic role, both by word and example. You govern. And those of you who are pastors, you have that authority of service to the body of Christ. I can think of several priests who have been a good, wonderful example of a priest in school. But it's saying, Vera alluded to this last night. I really appreciated it. If you know priests, you don't stereotype priests. If you know priests, we have a saying that to know one Dominican is to know one Dominican, because we're not quite cookie cutter kind of people, you know. But one priest is one priest. And yet you have that splendid character on your soul. I mean, your soul will be judged as the soul of a priest. And that speaks to us, that speaks to the rest of us. It is a great source of hope. And if it's one thing the church needs, if it's one thing the human person needs right now, it's hope. We have people who are scared to walk to their mailboxes. So that virtue of hope is important. I usually tell a few stories about priests to make a point, but it's hard for somebody who speaks as slow as I do in the South to get anything in 10 minutes. But I want to mention one priest. 2 years ago, 3 maybe now, our bishop in the Diocese of Nashville was a bishop named David Choby. He has since gone to God. A real school bishop and a real priest bishop. You would love it. And he was a great encourager of priestly vocations. We had a seminarian from Columbia who had a recurrence of cancer, and it became evident that it was terminal. The bishop went flew to his state, flew to Texas, ordained him a deacon on his deathbed, and then ordained him to the priesthood. He even had a first mass with him. Every seminarian of the seminary class in Nashville was either present or online to see the ordination. He lived 2 days after ordination. But his soul will be the soul of a priest. And the kids in school were praying for him and praying that the bishop can get there in time to ordain him. It taught them more about the beauty and the reality of the priesthood than any textbook ever could have, and about the brotherhood of the priesthood. So all I'm saying is I'm very grateful for your vocations, and that Catholic schools not only will not flourish without a priest, they cannot flourish without the priesthood. So keep up the good work. I did want to explain the handout that you access in the folder. It's the 5 attributes of Catholic identity, 5 components, if you want to call them that, to which Kevin alluded this morning. And there are several quotations from various documents on education, but they have specific implications for the priesthood. Whether it's that quote about living a community, or being proclaimed, that the gospel has to be proclaimed by witness, or just the fact that we're rooted in baptism, that the church is a pastoral instrument of the church. So now I recognize people. There's Matt. So that it just kind of gives some pivotal quotes on the document that relate particularly or in a particular way to the priesthood. Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Sister. If you priests want a retreat mistress, you've got one there, huh? Our next presenter is Tom Carroll, who's the Superintendent of Schools for the Archdiocese of Boston. It's just about a year now, isn't it, Tom? Or?
It was a year in April.
April, okay. Well, give us your reflections.
Well, as I joked to Cardinal Sean, this wasn't the job I signed up for. It's been a heck of a year for sure. But in terms of, I have a lot of, and I should explain to people who don't know, I'm a kind of midlife convert to Catholicism. I didn't go to Catholic schools, never was a principal, never was a Catholic school teacher. And so I was kind of a non-traditional candidate for this post. So I had a lot to learn, but I think one of the advantages of not having that background is I think I've seen things a little more clearly than somebody who just takes for granted the way things are as they are right now in this moment in time. So things shock me that don't shock people that have been seeing this slow degradation of Catholic schooling over time. But in I've met some fabulous priests who are serving as school pastors. And I've also met a number of people who frankly should just quit their job, their assignment as a school pastor. So I would just quickly, for the sake of time, cover 5 points. And these are all geared towards what I think a school pastor should do. Number 1, to reference the point I just made, it's all about commitment. There are, and I'm assuming Boston is not unique in this, there are a lot of people who are school pastors who didn't want to be school pastors, or maybe want to be school pastors when they're younger, but they find it as their responsibilities include more and more individual churches, and they're getting kind of strapped for time. A lot of them think it's a pain in the rear end. And so I think people that are not willing to fully commit to being a school pastor and giving the school everything that it needs from them should just step aside. And there are a lot of young priests in Boston who would love to be school pastors, and they're being blocked because the positions are held by people who don't even want the position, frankly. And so that's an issue. So I think there has to be, to do this well and to inspire children, they have to see in the pastor that he truly loves that aspect of his vocation. I don't see that universally. Second, there needs to be a vision. And I'm always amazed when I meet principals or teachers or pastors that very few people inherit, they go from one assignment to the next, and the school is as they find it. And very few people ever step back and say, what, they don't have this illicit thought of like imagining what the world could look like, almost like they're not allowed to. And I always think of when I look at schools, and I founded 10 schools in a different context when I was doing charter schools. But with each school, I always thought in my mind, whatever the ultimate grade was in that school, what did I want that child to look like when they walked across the graduation stage? And then everything in that school then has to be reverse engineered to create that outcome. That happens in very few Catholic schools. Some of them don't need it. I would argue about 95% of them do. And so when somebody gets an assignment as a school pastor, I don't think they should accept the school as it is. I think they should really think through carefully what their vision is, specifically in terms of evangelizing the children that are in their custody. What do they want the kids to know about the faith? What do they want the interior life of the children to be? What do they see as the role of, the importance of students by the time they graduate to actually know the grand sweep of all the contributions the Catholic Church has made across time. I always joke to my evangelical friends, we wrote the New Testament and created Western civilization. What have you done lately? So there's a lot there in almost every academic discipline, but you have to decide, your vision has to be set that that's what you're trying to actually pull off. And I also think part of that vision should be that we have to end the practice of having what I call tail between the legs Catholics. We are raising a generation of children who are embarrassed to be Catholic because we're embarrassed to talk about Catholicism. And when they go out into the world, it's almost uncomfortable for them to talk about their faith. I think we need to, again, and part of this is the abuse scandal have made people, whenever they mention they're Catholic, somebody starts making comments about the abuse scandal. But I think we haven't done a really good job of having the children in our custody know all the fabulous things the church has done over thousands of years, and everything. You can't go anywhere in the world and not run into a Catholic serving the poor. Our footprint in Boston, serving immigrants, soup kitchens, everything, is much larger. We're the largest social service nonprofit in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I bet you not a single child that attends Catholic schools in the Boston Archdiocese knows that. So I think we have to give them pride in their faith, what it means to be Catholic in a bunch of different dimensions, so that when they go out they're not going to be evangelists for their faith, even though we have them for a tremendous amount of time, unless they're proud to be Catholic. Third item is people power, which is Ronald Reagan had an adage that he would rather have an empty desk than have desks occupied by somebody who didn't believe in his vision. And so we have lots of desks in not even just the pastoral center, let alone every single school, that are occupied by people who simply don't believe in Catholicism, or don't believe in our worldview, or don't believe in truth. And so I think a school pastor has to decide that one of the top things they have to focus on is who are the people that we are entrusting to be witnesses to the faith. Are we allowing school leaders that personally don't practice their faith? I always joke with children. Young children may be short, but it doesn't mean they're stupid. They can see through fakes. So they can see when there's a school mass, when half of the teachers don't go up to receive communion, that's not lost on children. So when a teacher who's teaching, a grade school teacher is teaching religion and they're not Catholic themselves, children see through that. So the school pastor has to focus on who's leading the school. Are they truly a witness to the faith? We've put in 10 new principals. I'll stack them against any of the 10 principals in the Archdiocese in terms of their commitment to the faith. But it frankly didn't used to be a criteria in hiring principals. They were just looking for educators. They weren't looking for witnesses to the faith. They need to take control of the search process. I have a leadership role in the search process, but the pastors should be much more active. I've seen pastors hand over the responsibility to search committees that are comprised of literally nobody who's committed to the evangelizing function of Catholic schools, and have attempted to pick, and try to get us to put into the pool people that they shouldn't consider for a moment. And I think pastors, Father Parish, for example, who some of you know, is very good. He even gets involved in teaching appointments. So the principal hires people, but they can't actually put them on the payroll until he interviews the teacher and explores what their faith life is like. I think that's totally legitimate. Every single principal candidate that I have the ability to, nobody can get on the hiring list for a principal unless my office approves them. So I've been asking, this is before Our Lady of Guadalupe, all kinds of nosy questions about what their faith life is, what their spouse's faith life is, what the faith life of their children is, and all that. And every single person I do this to, I ask them whether, if they got the job, they would send students to the March for Life in DC. And I get these looks of horror from every single person I interview that are convinced that I'm asking a series of illegal questions in a job interview context. And I always explain to them, do you think the Catholic Church has the ability to stipulate that a priest can't be a Muslim? So if you cede that point, and if the school leader is a minister of the church, we have the right to make sure that you're actually practicing the Catholic faith before we consider you for this position. But the culture, even in our diocese, has been historically not to ask those questions because they're uncomfortable. We've had people that said they go to church every week. We ask them where, they can't name the pastor. We ask them where the church is located. We had one person who said, who's connected to a very influential school president in the Boston market, family-wise. And she said she brings a bunch of children to the Spanish Mass every weekend. We then said, oh, that's interesting. What church is it? She gives the name of a church that doesn't have a Spanish Mass. She was just outright lying about what she was doing. And we said, well, maybe you just forgot the name of the church. Maybe you tell us how you get there since you go there every weekend. And she couldn't describe how she got from the school to the church every weekend. These are the kind of people that are applying for jobs and often get them. Fourth point is formation. The school pastors need to be much more aggressive and view that as a central part of their job to work on the formation of the school leader, the faculty, and the students. And lastly, the fifth point, and you've done this yourself, and I see Chris Peschel here as an example of that, but Bishop Kennedy has done this a lot in terms of mentoring and recruiting the next generation of school pastors. There are a lot of young people that will make great school pastors someday, but they have to be identified by people that are in senior positions, and they have to be cultivated so that when their time is right, they're prepared to take the job. I've recruited as principals people that had no interest, never thought they would become school leaders. I've recruited people out of Focus, for example, just having lunch with somebody and then convince them to become a school leader on the grounds that they could save more people being a school leader than in anything else, save more lives than any other thing they could possibly do with their lives. So I think if you look at my pitch to younger priests is you generally have people for an hour a week, and sometimes they're not always paying attention. But if you have a building full of children, first of all, they're more impressionable, but you have them 6 hours a day from 3 years old until they're 12, they hit 12th grade. That's a tremendous amount of time to influence the interior life of a child and with the prospect of them actually having a robust faith life forever. And a priest doesn't actually have that same, a priest who without a school doesn't have that same ability to reach that number of people. If you want them to go to confession every week, they have to go to confession every week. You want to trot them off to Eucharistic adoration, they go to Eucharistic adoration. You want them to be altar boys, then they'll be altar boys. So the element of control, if you will, but the element of daily inspiration that you can provide is incredible. And I think just as we're going out trying to get people to become priests in the first sake, we also should be taking the people who have become priests and really pitching them on wanting to become school pastors if they've got the energy and the passion and the excitement and the commitment to evangelize young children. So those are the 5 points that I would suggest.
Tom, you need to market that and send it to about 150 ordinaries in the country. To me, it's absolutely unthinkable and unconscionable that a diocese, a bishop, would appoint a priest to a parish with a school if the fellow doesn't want to be there explicitly. Those of you who are participating in the program, I sent you that questionnaire and I asked, does your diocese have a policy of assigning a priest willy-nilly to a school? Most of you replied, I don't know what the policy is. But in point of fact, if I were an ordinary, very, very simply, no priest would ever be assigned to a parish with a school unless he explicitly said, I want that parish because it has a school. Otherwise, the damage would be absolutely irreparable. And we have seen that for 40 plus years, and still bishops don't get the picture, all right?
And I'll give you just a quick example of one. I'm now involved, I'm consulted, but I don't have a vote whenever somebody's assigned as a school pastor. And we had a case where a very contentious school where we fired the principal, who is horrendous. And a bunch of things had to be done that required a pastor who was very decisive and was willing to corral parents and the faculty and everybody in a particular direction to frankly save the school and make it more religious. And they were about to pick, without being too specific, a pastor who has a comfort dog who was completely conflict avoidant. And put him in a situation that required almost like a Winston Churchill type character or Douglas MacArthur type character. And he just wasn't the right person. So it's not only, even though he was interested in being a school pastor, he could not be the school pastor in that school. So I think people are moved around for a bunch of different reasons. The school is only one part of the package. When somebody's assigned, in our case, we call them collaboratives. So you're getting multiple churches, you got a couple other things, and the school's there too. So they're not being assigned just to a school because we don't have enough active priests for that to happen. So it's just one of many considerations. And I think that has to be flipped completely. Because the biggest way to convert a bunch of people and to wake up people's faith is through the schools. I think is much more than the churches.
The other point that Tom makes is highlighting the young priests. When I have spoken at seminaries, which I did at St. John's in Boston a couple of years ago, the seminarians were extremely enthusiastic, open to the school apostolate. When I've done workshops for priests, we did in the Archdiocese of Detroit last year, the young priests are on board for this. They just need to be unleashed, the expression that Archbishop Vigneron uses so often, all right? They're ready to do what needs to be done, but they have to be given also some of the tools to do it, but the right attitude is there. Tom highlights the issue of Catholic pride. We can't exist without that, huh? And we have justifiable pride. So it shouldn't be this false humility. And we also have this horrible inferiority complex. And it comes from being an immigrant church But we need to get over that immigrant complex. We're now in the third and fourth and fifth generation of the same silliness of trying to mimic what goes on in the secular sphere. And that happens in the school environment as well. What's the public school in town doing? Oh, we better be doing that. Well, not really. And I think that's an important point. And when Tom talks about the accomplishments of the church, for heaven's sake, every Catholic school teacher ought to read Thomas Wood's book, what the Catholic Church created Western civilization. I'm just finishing a book right now by Robert Riley called America on Trial, about the founding fathers' vision and how that was rooted in the principles of Thomas Aquinas and Father Suarez, the Jesuit the theologian. People don't know this stuff, and they need to know that. He talks about teachers and administrators being believers. We have to include pastors in being believers also. It's very easy to simply be a cog in a wheel. And there was a joke told in a very large archdiocese where there was a priest who was a chancery rat for his whole life. And he was, personnel director, he did business and planning, grounds and maintenance, and just kept shifting from one position to another. And the joke was, if you passed the chancery at 2 o'clock in the morning and there was a light on the 17th floor, you knew that Father so-and-so was there. And they said, but the real joke is, if it could be categorically proven on Sunday night that God did not exist, Henry would still open the chancery on Monday morning, precisely because there was no faith dimension to any of it. That's an uncomfortable thing to have to say about priests, but very often, all too often, that is the case. And when they're not engaged in the apostolate in a correct manner, that's usually the problem. And it's the big elephant in the middle of the room that no one wants to talk about. And then finally, I'm sorry?
One other point there. A lot of school pastors say to me that they don't feel comfortable telling the professional educators how to run a school. And I get that with roughly 2/3 of the people that I'm going back and forth trying to get them to be much more assertive.
Well, see, this comes back to the problem that emerged in the late 60s and the early 70s, where you had these wacky nuns who wanted to take over the entire operation, and they told priests clearly, we don't want you in here, you just sign the checks on Friday. And that generation of priests still has this bitterness toward Catholic schools precisely for this reason. But in point of fact, there is a key role for the pastor to play. And then finally, Tom highlighted recruitment of focus missionaries. These are phenomenal young people, And the data tell us, by the way, the vast majority of them are the products of Catholic schools. And so there's another reason to talk about Catholic pride. We've done something really, really good, something very, very well done. And the fact that these young people are willing to volunteer 2, 3, 4 years of their lives for the service of evangelization, and that they come from precisely a Catholic ethos. This is something that we need to plug into and highlight. So last but not least, Charles Taylor, whom I got to know when Charles was the superintendent of the schools for the Diocese of Gaylord, Michigan. And Charles did a phenomenal job there, and with a great deal of work in terms of formation of pastors. So, Charles, take it away.
Father, thank you. I want to thank everybody, all the priests and religious, for your vocations and for all the good lay leadership that we're listening to. Just a little bit about myself before we begin. It's about my 35th year teaching. In that time, I've taught at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. I've been a Catholic school principal at the elementary, middle school, and high school level, and I've also been a superintendent of a small rural diocese. With that said, my K-8 education was through the public school, and not a very good one. My father was in the military, so I literally went to kindergarten in Germany, and then we bounced around in Colorado schools in Virginia, some experience in Philadelphia. But I was a terrible student, and when people ask about Catholic education, I always tell them that I didn't get to go to Catholic school. I got sent to Catholic school. I got sent to Bishop Ireton Catholic School in Alexandria, Virginia, because I had pretty much failed out of the public school in Northern Virginia that I was attending. My parents were frustrated, and so I remember being mad and angry and thinking to myself, I just gotta just keep doing what I've been doing. Wasn't a bad kid, but I didn't hand any homework in, was bored most of the time, and I was really angry at my parents. So within the first couple of weeks of school, I really didn't like the place that I was at. There were 18 priests on the faculty, and wasn't making very many friends, didn't know many people. But I was in sports after school. And so I remember one day walking down the hall, it was in the middle of the day, and my English teacher saw me, Father Fitzpatrick, and he said, oh, Charles, hey, could I see you for a second? And I said, yes, Father. I walked over, and he said, could I see you after school today? And I said, okay, I'll stop in, So I stopped in after school, and Father said, oh, Charles, I'm so glad to see you. Have a seat, I sat down in a chair, desk, and he went over to his desk, and he started writing. And I sat there, and I waited about, a couple minutes, and I said, Father, you wanted to see me. What do you want? And Father walked over, and he looked at me, and he said, well, my gosh, Charles, we've been in school for 2 weeks. You haven't handed anything in. You have lots to do. Look here. And he put his grade book out and showed me all the assignments that I hadn't done. And I said, well, my dad's coming to pick me up. No, I've taken care of that. I've called your father. He's coming late. My dad worked at the Pentagon, and he had taken a later shift that day. So anyways, I sat there, I did my work, and Father was just the nicest. And he was so nice to me. It was just a weird situation. So I left, I went home that night, came back to school the next day. Middle of the day, there's Father. Charles, I need to see you. I'm trying to get away. I walk over. I need to see you after school. So you can imagine how the story went. In the end, I really gained a tremendous respect for Father Fitzpatrick and all my priests. I learned very quickly it was a lot easier to just do the work. And then eventually what happened is the priests, they did things differently. There was dimensions to your person and who you are that suddenly had meaning during the school day that had not had meaning in the public schools that I had attended. And the difference was so profound that in those 4 years that I attended that school, I came out a completely different person. I shudder to think who I would have been, what I would have been without that 4 years and those experiences. And the models were the priests who were so human and so admirable. And then you wanted to get to know the rest of them, their spiritual life. So whether Brother George was coaching me in track or the priests were teaching biology, whatever it was, when you saw them doing other things you wanted to know more about them. Which brings me to my next point, talking about the power of priests. I can tell you that in my own life, the power of that priestly presence in the classroom and of priests who I knew were my principal, these were defining characteristics for me. These people became the models of education, not just the classical education that I received, but how I received it, how it was walked through, how the principals managed the school, how the teachers ran the classrooms, how the journey was walked together. This was the difference. Not that we didn't have difficulties or problems, but how the journey was walked. And so when I became superintendent for the Diocese of Gaylord, I would travel around to the different schools. And if you ask me what a priest can do in a school, I can tell you they can do one of two things. It can do great good and great harm. And I saw all of it. When I was a principal at a small rural school, I had a wonderful pastor. And on days that were very difficult, he had the ability to talk to me. And after having a conversation with him, I was able to see that it was about souls and heaven and saints and all the ethereal, all the things that were the supernatural things. And the human things that were getting me down, that were causing problems, kind of melted away. Because of my pastor, because of my pastor's vision, because it was more, the school wasn't the problem that I had on my desk at the time. The school was more about that. And so you went home lighter. I also had the experience that would go the other way, that, you know, you'd have a conversation and things would get worse. You would get bogged down. You would get off track. So I would see when I was out, that you would want a certain pastor. I would say to them, Father, the kids love you. Can you just walk through the school? Can you just walk through the school and say hi to the teachers? And the pastor would do that, and everybody would smile, and the kids would run over and say hi. And the pastor had that impact, whether he's greeting the kids in the morning or saying mass, any kind of ability to just be around and be part of the journey. Walk the journey with the staff. Walk the journey with the kids. I also had pastors that if they walked to the school, they would blow the place up. And I mean, literally just kind of being their presence in the school sometimes would cause great difficulty, or their inability to walk a situation through. Or as other people have talked about, a pastor that really didn't want to be pastor of a school and didn't have a vision. And for a lay person, there were, I guess the other piece to it that is so important that I needed from the priests was that all of us could be doing many different things. I remember the first time I got hired as a principal in a Catholic school, I could feel the relief of the priest. We finally got that position filled, right? We finally got somebody in there. But I needed to not just to be commissioned, I needed to feel commissioned. I needed to feel the church wants you to do this, Charles. We're asking you to step up. And I can tell you that over my time, the ability of a bishop or the ability of a pastor, the ability of a person at the diocese to send the message that we want this. The church wants a school. We want to commission people to do this. People will step up. But if you step up and then you feel like, or the idea gets in your head that you've stepped up and now a box has been checked, that we now have that square filled and that position is, we don't have to worry about it anymore. And then behind the scenes, you really can't get a sense of whether the parish actually wants the school, or the pastor wants the school, or the bishop wants the school. Then you're very conflicted as a lay person. Why am I doing this? This has to be greater than myself. So the leadership of the pastor to commission the people that they've, participated, hopefully, in building that school and that school community is absolutely vital in having a sense of the mission of the church. Is this intended to exist? Is it important? And what is my role in it? What am I, what are the sacrifices for? What is the parish sacrificing for them? So all of these things, the priest, the pastor, the religious that might be working in the school, is absolutely vital, and it changes the journey. The journey is on the wrong path or being walked incorrectly when these things are missing, because you're always going to have problems. So it is only about that journey as you're walking together, how those problems are walked through and seen through and ministered through, or how they are lacking and not. And so in my memory, I can look and see those pastors and priests, those teachers, and I know all of us can. We can look to the teacher that we loved, we loved the class, and we can look to the teacher that made life miserable. And at the end, you would say to yourself, when you're sitting in the class with the teacher that makes you feel miserable, you knew in your mind, it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be this difficult. And when you were in the class or in the situation with the teacher that was the great teacher, time flew by and you didn't understand, how is it so easy? How is it so powerful? those two differences, the principal, the pastor, so I'd encourage all those priests that are here listening, everybody, that as you take on your role in the school, that you take it on to be that good teacher, that good shepherd we always hear about in the gospel readings, because it's so miserable. It's so absolutely miserable when it's the other way. And so I'll continue to pray and encourage our pastors to, as you step up into leadership, you might not always have the right answer or the right background, but you can have the right spirit, the right love, and the ability to commission those around you for common purpose, for common mission.
Great, thanks, Charles. Any questions or comments for any of the presenters for this round? Yes.
Yeah, I had a question about, I really loved what Mr. Carroll was talking about, especially the idea of being a chaplain at school. I think it's much more alluring for me to be a chaplain at a school assignment rather than to be the pastor school role. The pastor being, there's so much administration that pulls you away from the school that it's like trying to be at the school with your hands tied, because there's just a level of bureaucracy that makes it really challenging as a pastor school assignment. And I would agree. I think there's a lot of young priests that would love to be chaplains and just to have that freedom to be at the school regularly and in contact with the students. And that's just something that I desire as well myself. And I appreciate what he said about being more aggressive as far as forming the teachers. I've been involved in some workshops with faculty, and then trying to figure out, well, where do I want to go with this, and what do I want to encourage and challenge, and to how do you educate an educator? I have great respect for their knowledge and ability and what they do every day, but how do I challenge them even more? And I might just ask them further, how does he see the chaplain or the priest to be aggressive in that role? What does that look like to Mr. Carroll?
He went off. He had a Zoom call with Betsy DeVos. But for what it's worth, I think I can help with that. We talk about a theology of presence, huh? And that can be another slogan, which means very, very little. But what Tom talked about, or Charles, the priest walking through the school. Whenever I visit a parish school and the pastor brings me through the building, I can tell immediately what his relationship is. Because if the kids don't run out of line and run up and say, "Hi, Father John, how are you?" and I say, he's not known here, all right? I gave a workshop at a parish for a parish school faculty, and the faculty did not know that there was a parochial vicar in the parish who had been there for 3 years. He had never darkened the door of the school. And so I think that's the first point. And at times we're so focused on our direct ministry, sacramental ministry in particular, toward the children, that we forget there's also a responsibility toward the faculty. And certainly what I have found is, again, just that simple walkthrough. At times a faculty member will say, "Father, do you have 5 minutes?" And she's having a personal problem, a family problem, or a crisis of faith or whatever. And the opportunity for her to plug into you at that point to say, "Can you help me with this?" And so it's not simply directed toward children, but it's a very all-encompassing thing. Or if you're on the playground as kids are going onto the buses at the end of the school day, it's not unusual for a parent to come up and say, "Father, could you pray for this thing? Or could you do this for me? Or I need your input on something." So it's not something that's nuts and bolts administrative, huh? Quite the contrary. It's kind of a spontaneous apostolate that occurs. And it's not a checklist. Oh yeah, I spoke to one parent today, or I went to this meeting. And I think we've been so conditioned to the church as a corporation that we lose track of and sight of the fundamental mystical nature of the church. And so, one of the problems with so many bishops is they want to be CEOs, and they're very bad CEOs besides, but they love that because it looks like I'm doing something, all right? I had a corporate executive meeting today with my chancery staff. Well, what does that mean? What does it accomplish? What does it do, all right? And pastors can emulate that same thing. A young priest told me in a large urban diocese on the East Coast that his pastor, catch this, had 12 secretaries in the rectory. All right? Secretaries. All right? Everybody getting a minimum of $60,000 a year plus benefits. All right? And we wonder why we're in trouble. All right? First of all, what does that say about the mentality? He had to have the secretaries on some kind of a rotation because there weren't enough cubby holes for all of them. So he had a personal secretary, and he had a secretary for bereavement, a secretary for this is insanity, right? And schools have been doing up to the same thing. I laugh at the fact that, the first grammar school that I attended with over 2,000 kids, the principal had a cubby hole for her office that was about 5 by 6, and half of that space was taken up by those old public address systems, and her desk was the ledge of the public address system, all right? And now you hear about a school of 150 kids, and there's a principal, and there's a vice principal, and there's a development director, there's a this and that. This is all bureaucracy, and most of it is completely inefficient besides. And we're hiring people constantly. I know, and the superintendents on our panel will die to hear this, but a diocese recently hired a superintendent with a diocese with only 20-some schools, and the superintendent is getting $285,000 a year. All right, I got into the wrong business. This is all out of control completely. So, any other observations? We're going to take a few minutes break, so you want to get a bagel or something, and then we're going to come back and Chris is going to regale us with his material while we do a little munching. But before we do that, any other questions or observations? Okay, so let's come back at, let's say 12:30, and we'll have Chris's presentation, and then that will segue into one of the afternoon sessions. Okay.